Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, the podcast in which I ask those from in and around the comedy world what comedy means to them. We discuss topics such as culture, diversity, triumph and adversity, starting as a comic after leaving university, laughter, trauma, finding comedy in drama, and realising how hard it is to make a joke about a llama. I love talking to people in and around the comedy world about comedy, and if you'd like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Sometimes a comedian needs determination to succeed, sometimes it's simply raw, unbridled talent, and sometimes the vigour and naivety of youth. My guest on this episode has all this and more, and while not what you might imagine of a working-class northern club comic, it is her northern tenacity and working-class down-to-earth attitude that has endeared her to audiences to the extent that in a 10-year career starting at just 18, she's been twice nominated for an Edinburgh Award and supported the likes of Catherine Ryan, Jason Manford and Kerry Godleman. It's stand-up comedian Lauren Pattison. Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me for this. It's an honour.
No problem.
If you're happy, we can just jump right in.
Perfect. That sounds good.
Okay, so the obvious first question for me is you've made such an early start in comedy. You know, you started comedy in university pretty much at the same time. I mean, how did you get into comedy? How did that start for you?
So I've always loved stand-up. Like when I think back to being like 15, 16, you know, I know that people might be spending their money on like gig tickets. I suppose I was doing that, but I was also like always going to see comedy. So because we've got quite a few like nice venues in Newcastle, so like sometimes on my Facebook memories it'll come up from when I was like a teenager, and I'll have been going to see like Peter Kay, Rod Gilbert, John Richardson, Russell Howard, like all in the space. Usually this time of year, but I don't know when this is going out, but this kind of October-y autumn time when all the comics tour, and I loved watching it, and I've got a very, I don't want to say addictive personality, but I get fixated on things quite easily. So I think the more I enjoyed it, the more I became fascinated by it. And I also did drama. I've done drama since I was like 12, 13. And for me, it just seemed a very like, not necessarily an easy thing to get into, but I already had that performance bug. And I was like, well, hang on, there's nothing to say that I couldn't have a go at this. And then my drama group, I was in like a little youth theatre. They started up some like comedy workshops. Right. And I thought, what a brilliant thing to offer so that youth group was for 11 to 25. Right. And now looking back, I'm like, what an amazing thing to offer for like young people. And that really got us the bug. I was like, I love this. So I waited till I was 18 because obviously I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to. So I was 15 when I did that. And then I waited till I was 18 to sort of start stand-up properly. Because all I could think was, am I going to be allowed in the venues? You know what I mean? I was like, if I try and start stand-up now as like a 16, 17-year-old, are places even going to let me in? So I didn't really know where to start. But I made this project when I did for an A-level, an extended project. Still to this day, don't know what that is, and I left school 10 years ago. And I did mine on stand-up, and I remember I made this map of the British Isles, and I put like bits of thread and pins and did comics from all over the UK. And then I wrote like essentially an accompanying guide to go with it, which probably was copy and pasted off Wikipedia. But made this like guide to British stand-up comedy. And I remember seeing on a few people's like bios that had written up that they entered So You Think You're Funny, and that was for comedians who'd been going less than a year. And I was like, well, I've been going less than a year because I've not even done a gig, which I do think if I was in this position now, I'd be like, oh, I'll wait till I've gigged a year and then I'll start. But because of the naivety and confidence of an 18-year-old who's quite literally got nothing to lose, I was like, I'll just enter that. I entered that just for the stage time. And I was in my heat in Newcastle. I can't remember too many people who were in it, but I can't remember. I don't know what he's up to now. Lost Voice guy. I don't think he really went on to do anything. So that's the first time I met him, was my first ever gig. So I've been on this really nice journey like with Lee, which I love. And I've loved watching his like star rise as well. But yeah, I entered that just for the stage time. And I was thinking, well, if I've done a gig, that's, you know, the hard bit out the way. And I was at Tea in the Park, a music festival in Scotland. I got the phone call to say I got through to the semi-finals. And I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, I didn't do it to get to the finals. I did it for stage time. And they were like, well, you're in the semi-finals. So that was, I think, the first time I'd been up to the Fringe, because obviously the semi-finals are at the Fringe. And I just again, I think the first time as a comedy fan going to the Fringe, you're just like, oh, this is a whole world I can get stuck into. So that was all the summer before I started university. So the gig was the May, the semi-finals were the August. I started uni in the September. And I remember, obviously, once I'd found out I was in the semi-finals, I was like, I'm going to have to try and get some more gigs. So I got in touch with the Stand, and they gave us a spot on Red Raw in the July, and that was like my introduction to the Stand.
Yeah.
Got spots on like a couple of other little local gigs, but it essentially put us in a really good position that from September, I was like, oh no, I like this, and I want to do it. And I didn't do many gigs that first year because I was first year of uni, so I was also like, getting pissed is top priority. So I don't think I would have to take my socks off to count how many gigs I did in that first year, if you know what I mean, from like May 2012 till about like sort of September 2013. Didn't really gig that much. And then I remember going into my second year of uni and being like, right, no, I want to push this a bit more. I'm going to start traveling for gigs and looking for gigs further afield and really like pushing it. So I think my second year in technically my second year in comedy was really my first proper year in comedy. If I was one of those sneaky acts, I just wouldn't have counted that first year because I did about 6 gigs. So like I would have just been like, no, I started in September 2013, but I've always been like, I'm too honest for my own good. I was like, no, that's when I did my first gig. That's when I started. And I was forever like spending my student loan on mega buses and EasyJet hotels. I don't know if you've ever been fortunate enough to...
I've never been in one, I'm aware of them.
I've stayed in the one in Edinburgh. I've stayed in the one in Croydon, because when I used to gig in London, that was like the cheapest place for us to stay. And you had to pay extra for a room with a window. But obviously being like that young and having like no money, I was like, well, I don't need daylight. That's fine. And I used to spend my student loan on like these horrible, just like grotty little hotels with no windows so I could do stand-up. And I look back and I think it's not many students like you, Lauren. I think most people tend to, as student comics, will join the comedy society and maybe just gig in the local area. Not this idiot. Nah, but I think it did us really good. I think it proved from day one I had the right work ethic and I had the right attitude, which is if I want this, I'm going to have to go out and earn it. But definitely.
Was there a combination of like this focus and sort of naivety that you just sort of go, oh yeah, I'll just do that, it'll be fine?
I think so. And for me, it was all very fun. So I was like, well, I'm enjoying it. And I never thought it could be a career because in my stupid little head, I was like, there's the comedians on telly. Yeah. And I didn't realise, like my sort of introduction to the comedy circuit was when I started stand-up. So all I'd seen was like telly-comedy. And then suddenly this whole new world opened up to it. And I was like, oh, so you can make a living from comedy without being on telly? And people were like, most comedians make a living without being on telly. And I remember someone saying, it was at the Stand, one of the other acts, I was dead young, dead new. This is before I'd even done a paid gig. And he's like, you do know you could make a living from this? And I was like, are you for real? And I got my first like paid gig offer from the Stand. And I probably only got about 20 quid or something. I got given a 5-minute spot on a weekend. And I remember being like, oh my God, this is incredible. It's like someone's giving me £20 for a gig. Whereas now, if someone tried to book me for 20 quid, I'd be like, have a little rethink about that. Obviously, at the time, even to get £20, I was like, this is amazing. This is brilliant. And it taught us the value of it a little bit as well. Because I was like, well, if I do want to get paid for this, I'm going to have to be good. I'm going to have to work hard and I'm going to have to prove to people that I deserve to be paid for it. And God, I remember getting that first paid gig offer and you're just like, I've made it. Can't wait to spend this £20 on a hotel room with no window.
It's a week away. Yeah.
Exactly.
But it wasn't long after that. You only been doing it a few years and you already start, you're in the finals. You've got the Total Student Comedy Awards, BBC New Comedy Awards.
Yeah, there was a sort of a window where I think, obviously I'd entered a lot of comedy competitions and sort of got to the semis or whatever, got wherever. Yeah. But then after, because obviously most of the rules constantly change on what the eligibility is for these competitions. But when I was doing it, it tended to be like a 5-year sort of time limit on it. And it was sort of coming up to around the 3-4 year mark where I'd obviously found my voice and found my groove. that was this period where I was just in like I feel like every weekend I was in a different competition final. And I remember I think I might have done the BBC New Comedy Awards in 2016. I got the finals of that. And I was like, that's it. No more competitions. Like it took us 4 goes to get to the final. And I was like, to me, that's the most prestigious one. I was like, you've got to the finals of that. This was 2016, so I'd been gigging like 4 years. And I was like, maybe like call it a day with the competitions. You've got the finals of like a lot of the important ones. And then I think it might have been the Natties, possibly the Natties, maybe Leicester Square. I can't remember which one, but I entered that after Edinburgh that year and got through. And I was like, nah, I'll get one more. We'll do one more. And I remember the final was in the January. Can't remember whether it was the Natties or Leicester Square, but I didn't place. And it was the first time I'd ever been disappointed not to place. I was used to not placing, but I really, really felt like I deserved to place. And anyone listening to this who doesn't know us, that's not usually my attitude. I'm usually very like hard on myself and stuff. I'm never the kind of comic who comes off stage who's like, oh, I smashed that, I ripped that. I'm always very like, it's not really my style to be like that. But I came off at this competition final and I was like, I deserve to be in the top 3, and I didn't place. And I remember being really annoyed about it. And I was like, well, why have I put myself through this? Like, I was on such a high to be in the BBC comedy final, and I feel like I really ruined it for myself. That was the January. And then 6-7 months later in the August, I got the best newcomer nomination. And it really put things into perspective for us. And I was like, God, as a new act, you're kind of made to feel like these competitions are the be all and end all. But really what I should have been doing is focusing on what the next step was, which was writing an hour. And that obviously turned out to be something. Don't want to brag, but pretty good at writing an hour. 2 of my 3 hours have got Edinburgh Comedy Award nominations, which I think is quite a good percentage rate in there.
So you're talking about, I think, Lady Muck, yes? Sold out run?
Yeah. Oh, it was bizarre. Because I knew I had a good show. I was confident in my show. I was happy with it. But I think there's this sort of divide between circuit comics and London/Soho/fringe comics. And as someone who grafted the circuit, I'd moved to London by this point, but I still never felt in that little London inner circle, in that cool group. That was never me. And I still felt I was very much a circuit comic, but I didn't care. I was like, well, I don't care. Like, I want to be a comedian. And if my income is going to come from the circuit, then I want to be a circuit comic. I need to be a circuit comic. But I kind of knew, or maybe not necessarily knew, but had believed a lot of other comics who said, oh, the circuit comics don't get the recognition in Edinburgh, blah, 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 it's all biased, all this. So in my head, I was like, well, I know I've got a good show. I know the audiences will like it, but I'm not the kind of comic who's going to get the industry nods and the industry recognition because I'm a circuit comic, and that's maybe looked down on a little bit or not held to as high a pedigree by certain people. And then I remember, I think the first previews were obviously the Wednesday, Thursday, and we had to paper quite a lot of those, just get some bums in. But I was like, I wasn't expecting this sellout run. I had, I think, 3 goals for that festival. I wanted to sell out me weekends. I wanted to get 1 4-star review. That might have been it, actually. So I felt like they were quite achievable things to aim for. So the Wednesday, Thursday were previews. They were quite quiet. I remember having a busy Friday, Saturday. They might have sold out. I can't remember. Sunday didn't sell out. The Monday did, because that was the first 2 for one day. And I was like, well, you know what? After a good start, your first weekend's sold out. And your previews were quiet, but they were previews. And now you're into 2 for one days. And you're going to be fine, Lauren. And my PR had said, when do you want reviewers in? And I was like, well, day 1. Like, why not send them in? Because I think, again, there's sort of 2 camps of comics. There's the people who go up with a show ready and they appreciate their show will probably improve over the month, but day 1 is fringe ready. And I think there's other people who sort of work it out as they go along. But I've always been in the mindset, my audiences are paying the same ticket price, whether they come on day 1 or day 21. So I don't want to take a show on day 1 that I am not confident and happy to perform to a paying audience. So I think I had my first review in somewhere across that first weekend. But again, I didn't know. I was like, don't tell us when they're coming in, but I'm fine for them to come in. I think it was that first Monday, I got the first 5-star review from the list. So suddenly I was a bit like, whoa, smashed me goal of getting 1 4-star review. I was like, it's my first ever review of an hour. It's 5-star. And I think because it was so early in the festival, the list gave it this big fanfare of like, boop, boop, first 5-star review of the Fringe. And from that moment, I almost felt everyone's head go, shoo, and like turn to look at us. And I think so that show sold out that day. I'm guessing off the back of that review. And then I was watching, because I didn't have access to my sales report. I wasn't allowed to see my sales report, which I found baffling. I was like, it's kind of me who's spending thousands to be here. And I remember like going on the Fringe website, and then suddenly like the following day show was red. You know, when the square goes red to say it's sold out. And I was like, oh my God, I've sold out a show in advance. And then over the course of the next few days, I was watching those red squares grow. And I was like, oh my God, I've gone from selling out. So the Monday obviously sold out on the day, and then say the Tuesday sold out on the day, but then Wednesday sold out in advance, and then Thursday sold out too. And it was like that, you know, where shows were starting to sell out on the day, then sell out in advance, and then sell out. And I remember I got to the halfway point, and I was in one of the bars with Tom Horton, who was also having a lovely Fringe. And I opened up the Fringe website, and every square was red. And I was like, I've done it. I've sold it out. Like, oh my God. And I couldn't have got this picture, me and him. And I just look absolutely buzzing, because my goal was to sell out like a weekend. And I was like, I've sold out the whole thing halfway through. And it was one of those, just other people have said it to us as well, where like yours was the Fringe run that debut acts dream of. And I was like, it really was. But I handled it very well. I think I wasn't going out. I wasn't getting pissed. I wasn't getting swept up in that bubble that I think is very easy to get swept up in. I stayed, I think I only had like 1 or 2 nights out. So I wasn't hearing people go, you're going to get nominated, you're going to get nominated, I wasn't hearing any of that. I was seeing the nice reviews coming in and going on the poster. I was seeing the full rooms, and I was like, this is the most important thing. Because all I could think in my head was Louisa Omelin. Loved Louisa Omelin. Seen all of our shows, never got recognised with a Fringe nomination. So I was sort of quietly telling myself, do not fixate on getting nominated, because the important things have happened. You've sold it out. Audiences are enjoying it. You're getting the nice reviews to go on your poster.
Yeah.
Incredible people before you and after you have had incredible Fringe runs and not got nominated. So don't fixate. So I didn't even think about it. And then my agent at the time, she took me out for breakfast on what I now know was nominations day, but this is how far removed I was from it. I'd forgotten it was nominations day. So I just sat having breakfast, and then her phone rang and she went off to answer it. And she came back and she was like, you've got the nomination. And I was like, oh, is that why you brought me for breakfast? And like, in case I got the phone call. And she was like, yes, Lauren. Like, she obviously, I think she was probably expecting it more than I was. But again, I think that was brilliant, because everybody was like, but you must have known you were going to get nominated. And I was like, but there's fantastic shows before me and after me that haven't got nominated. And that's what I tell any act debuting. I'm like, of course it's impossible to not think about the nomination. I was like, but don't make it the be all and end all, because you can have a fantastic Fringe run and not get nominated. Like, it's So I think I had the right mindset.
You approach your comedy, it seems to me, with a lot of humility, like you set low expectations for yourself. Do you surprise yourself when you exceed your expectations?
Oh, definitely. I always think it's better to sort of not put. I talk about that in this year's show, about how, so I was like a gifted and talented kid, and I always felt through education a lot of pressure to be perfect, if you know what I mean. So I was the kind of kid who, if you weren't this kind of kid, you hated this kind of kid. If I didn't get an A, I saw it as a failure. Like that, my GCSE results, I got something like 12 or 8 A stars, 4 A's and 1 B. Was I happy with that? No, because I was like, I got 1 B. Oh my God. Same me A levels, I got A star, A, B. And rather than being like, A star, A, I was like, if only I tried a little bit harder, I could have got A star, A. Now I look back and I'm like, I hope my kid never feel, and this isn't me, this wasn't my parents putting the pressure on us, absolutely, in case anyone's like, there's like horrible parents. Absolutely not. They loved us no matter what. But I just think when you're in that sort of environment of, oh, you have to do well. And I think I sort of carried that even when I went to university. I had to start unpicking this of being like, you don't have to be perfect to be good at something. Like, don't put so much pressure on yourself. So when I started comedy, I think that's why I really tried to like manage my expectations and be like, you can do really well without sort of achieving this, this, and this. Like, of course, they're brilliant things to do, but if you don't get those, doesn't mean, because I remember once being really upset that the only sort of big comedy competition I'd not got to the final of or been considered for was Leicester Mercury. And that's the one where obviously you don't audition for it, you're picked by other promoters. And I think it was 2016. I knew I was debuting 2017. So I was like, this is probably the last year I'm going to be eligible for it. And I was like, fuck, I work so hard and I gig all over. And surely someone's going to acknowledge that and recognise that. And I remember seeing the nominations come out and being like, and I was really disappointed. And I have a word with myself and be like, but Lauren, look how many people haven't been nominated for the Leicester Mercury and have still done well. Like, these things are bonuses. And I think I've really tried hard to just sort of take some of the pressure off myself and be like, yeah, you can do it. You can do it.
But again, this sort of meteoric rise. It just seems that you go into university at the same time you start comedy. You come out of university and you're writing shows and you're doing tour support for people you've seen on the TV, people like Catherine Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely.
That must have been quite the change from doing Newcastle Stand to opening at theatres.
Oh, definitely. And I was just on about this. I was at Newcastle Stand last night and I was saying how so on Monday I went back to my old university and did like a stand-up workshop for them. And I said it was very surreal because the room I was in doing that workshop, the room opposite, when I was in my final year of uni, 21, final term of university, I think it was about May time, I was in a class one day and I got a direct message from Catherine Ryan and she was like, how much material have you got? And she'd hosted the Funny Women Awards like 8 months prior, 6 months prior. So obviously that's where she'd seen this. And she was like, how much material have you got? And straight away I thought, don't say you've only got 10 to 15 minutes because whatever she's asking for might be more than that. So don't talk yourself out of whatever she's offering before she's even offered it. So I said, how much are you needing and what is it for? And she was like, I need someone who's got about 20 minutes to do some tour support for me. I think it was Carlisle or Middlesbrough. I did Carlisle and Middlesbrough, but I think Carlisle was the first offer. She was like, that's not too far from you, is it? Didn't even look at a map. And I was like, yeah, of course, that's not far. Had never done a 20-minute spot before, but I thought, I am not letting this opportunity pass me by. I thought, I've got a really good 15 minutes. I'll just do that a bit slower until I've got 20 sort of thing. So I went and did that tour support for her. And I was telling these kids, I say kids, that's really disrespectful. I was telling the students on Monday, I was literally sat in that room like not 10 years ago, because I started 10 years ago. I was like, but 7 years ago when I got that that message. And I was like, it's a very surreal moment to come back as like a fully grown adult sort of thing and be like, God, how much has changed since I sat in that room lying about having 20 minutes of material. But I remember going and doing that gig for Catherine and loving it. I had a fantastic gig. It was my first real sort of like shot at supporting someone like very well known. And then I think she offered me Middlesbrough off the back of that. And then I bumped into her at Latitude Festival that summer and she was like, oh yeah, I'm going on tour again. We'll definitely have to have you in. And just, it opened so many doors for us. And I thought, God, if I'd said, I think maybe if I'd said I've got 15, she probably still would have given us the shot and been like, just do it a bit slower, which is what I did. But I thought it is just true how like one up, because I ended up getting sent, my first agent was United, who she's with. And I swear I got signed to them off the back of doing stuff with her, which I don't know for definite, but it seems pretty logical that not long after I did the tour support for her, I got signed to their agency, because that probably put me on their radar. And it is just sometimes kind of proves to me that in comedy, sometimes all you need is someone to open the door for you. And I do still feel this 10 years on, that sometimes I can bang, 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 bang on the door as loud as I want. But sometimes all you need is someone to let you in and someone to give you a shot to prove yourself. And I'm very, very grateful still 7 years on from that first support gig for her, that she gave me like a shot and she let me in front of her audience. I did my first sort of like proper tour. I'm doing my first sort of proper tour. And I went to, was it Salford? Yeah, Salford Lowry. Salford Lowry was my first like tour date. And I had people come to see me there who saw me support Catherine in the big room at Salford Lowry, probably about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I had audience tweeting us being like, it was quite a full circle moment for us that, you know, we first were introduced to you through to our support at Salford Lowry, and now you're doing your own show. And I was like, it is very surreal at times to be like, you do sort of see, it can be very hard, I think, sometimes in comedy and not see the fruits of your effort. And then sort of you get yourself in situations like that and you're like, oh no, I have progressed and I have improved and like I am seeing benefits. Just sometimes you have to stop looking at what other people are doing and comparing yourself to what they've done and be like, but look at what I've done.
Well, I think you got a CV to be proud of.
Oh, definitely.
So tell me about the latest show, It Is What It Is, which I saw you perform at the Monkey Barrel.
Oh, yes.
Fantastic show.
Thank you very much.
Lots of going on in there.
Oh, God, I know. It was quite a jam-packed show, definitely. That probably should have been more than an hour. But yeah.
Yeah, tell me, what's it about? How did you come to write it?
I saw a comment on a Guardian review of the show, because obviously it's a show that is technically about the pandemic, because it's about the last 2 years of my life. I'm a storytelling comedian. I talk about my life. So it's very difficult for me to write a show, or it was difficult for me to write a show in 2022 that didn't at least acknowledge the pandemic, because everything that has happened to me in the last 2 years is because of the pandemic. But I was trying very hard to make it clear to the audiences. I was like, I'm kind of going to address the pandemic, because none of this would have happened if I'd just come out and started doing material about working at Morrison's. People would have been like, why is she working at Morrison's? Like, she was a full-time successful comedian. Why is she working at Obviously, I had to go to Morrison's because of the pandemic. So I tried to make this dead clear in the show. I was like, of course, at times I'm going to touch on the pandemic, because none of this would have happened without the pandemic. That's sort of like the catalyst for everything happening. I was like, but it's not a show about COVID. It's not a show about the pandemic. It's a show about putting your life back together. It's a show about dealing with the hand of cards you've been dealt, sort of thing. And then I didn't read the actual Guardian review, but I just went to the comment section, which I don't normally do. For the last 4 years, I did my first bit of telly in 2018, read the comment section and cried, and decided I would never read the comment section again. And I've stuck to that until this year. I was really curious. I was like, I don't want to slag off the Guardian or their readers, but I thought that's the only sort of review that had been posted that had a comment section. So I don't know what was said in the review to garner this reply, but someone had written, is there any comedian who didn't just talk about the pandemic and make it about them, or something like that, words to that effect. And I was like, well, if you came to see the show, you would know it's not really about the pandemic. I just kind of acknowledge that these things happened because of it. And I'm sure they said something about making it about them. And I was like, I'm a comedian. I make everything about me. That's literally my job. But yeah, I kind of sort of open up the show by saying it's about the last 2 years of my life, and how literally sort of March 2020, obviously pandemic happened, lost all my comedy, broke up with long-term boyfriend, moved back to Newcastle, had to move into my childhood bedroom because I'd been living, in London for the last 4 years, 2 of those with a partner. So suddenly I'm back in my childhood bedroom in Newcastle, first time living at home since I was 18, so the first time in 8 years. I don't have a job anymore, I don't have a relationship, and it's about going, how do I get through this? I've been dealt quite a shitty hand of cards, and so did a lot of people, but how do I make the best of this? How do I get through this? And that sort of formed the show, sort of thing, and it allowed us to talk about sort of going back to work and going back to day jobs, but then also make a point about how that's nothing to be ashamed of, because I do think, I say it in the show, there's this weird sense of shame if you work in the arts. If you're not full-time, then people are like, I say you're not a proper comedian. And it's like, no, I am, but obviously how good you are is a huge thing in being able to go full-time. Of course it's a factor, but there's also other factors. So, and I don't want to bang on about it too much, but of course, if your parents are paying your rent and you don't have that financial responsibility, you are going to be able to go full-time quicker. Where, you know what I mean? Or if you're still living at home, or if you're doing this or doing that, if you're a single mom who's got a child to support, you're probably going to go full-time a little bit later because you've got another human to support. If you're a carer, or if you've got just any form of kids or responsibilities, you're probably going to cling on to that day job for a bit longer, you know what I mean? So that's why I really tried to make the point. I was like, of course, how good you are affects when you sort of make that jump to full time, but it's not the only factor. There are so many other factors. So please don't feel like ashamed if you've got a day job. Or I remember, I'm not going to name names, but watching somebody go full time very quickly, very, very quickly. And this was at a time when I was like struggling in London. And I think I named them to somebody, and I went, I look at them and they've done it. They've gone full time. Like, what am I doing wrong? And I think this is the mindset. And I know I'm not the only comedian. I thought I was doing something wrong because I hadn't left my day job yet. And then they explained this person was very financially supported by their parents. And I was like, oh, I'd never considered, as an adult who wasn't financially supported by our parents, I'd never considered that there were adults who were still getting their rent paid, sort of thing. Like, obviously now I know that's relatively common, but as someone who moved out at 18, went into halls of residence, paid our own rent, then spent the next 3 years in house shares, paying our own rent, working day jobs to pay that rent and support comedy. I moved to London at 22, again, paying my own rent. And I was like, wow, some people get their rent paid? Like, what? Like, it just never crossed my mind. And that sort of calmed us down a bit. And I was like, well, yeah, of course, if I've got the financial burden of having to pay 750 quid out of whatever I earn, of course, I'm not going to be able to take that plunge as quickly as someone who's supported. So I try and make that point in the show without also making it sound like I'm slagging off anyone who is privileged, because of course, if I was in a position where I could help my child, I'd help my child. And if I was in a position where I could be helped, absolutely, of course, I'd take it. So I try and make it very clear. I don't begrudge anyone who's been handed, like, a fast pass, or anyone who's had a leg up. I was like, but please remember that not everyone gets that. And if you're not getting that, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're not as good. It just means maybe you've got to, and it is the working class comics, you've got to graft that little bit harder for that little bit longer, but it's worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, you talk about themes like being working class, being from the north, but also, as we've talked about, you've got this focus in this achiever ethos. I mean,
yes.
Is it important to you to talk about those themes in your comedy? Are you trying to put the message across? Are you sort of thinking, I'm a working class hero and everyone needs to know it?
Well, that's the thing. I used to never talk about class in comedy. Never, never, never. And I think the 2017 show, I made maybe one little throwaway joke about it. I think the 2018 show, I think maybe I had a couple of jokes, but still not much. And I think I was woke, because it is a very middle-class dominated industry. And you worry if you talk about these things, people think you're attacking them.
Right.
And it's like, no, but I'm not attacking you. I'm just holding a magnifying glass up to the situation and being like, please, can we appreciate that it's not this easy for, not everyone has their rent paid. Not everyone has a parent who's well connected and can, like, sort you out that way. All these kind of little things, like, don't even consider, like, when you come from like this sort of background. But then this, especially off the back of the pandemic and about going back to work and briefly feeling like a failure. And at times when I was back to work, because it's not like I just went to work in a supermarket for 6 weeks and was like, oh guys, I'm such a hero. I worked for the full 2 years of the pandemic. I only left my last day job in April. And I didn't leave it because I could afford to. I left it because I knew I wasn't going to be able to juggle preparing for Edinburgh and the show. I was fully expecting to have to go back to a day job in September. And I just thought, if there's ever a time to really talk about the importance or to be very transparent about class, it's coming out the back of a pandemic when, I had to go back to work. So I had someone the other day being like, but you could have just stayed at your parents rent free. And I was like, that's not my vibe. I went, because one, we didn't know how long it was going to last. I went, and say if I did just sit in my parents' house twiddling my thumbs for 2 years, when the world reopened again, how would I have had the money to support myself in comedy? How would I have had the money to move out? You know what I mean? I was like, I had to support. My goal wasn't to be like, oh, well, I need to get a day job so that, like, I took some money away for comedy. It was, I've had to move back home for the first time in 8 years. I don't want to be living at home. I don't want to be a burden to my parents at all. So my goal, first and foremost, and I talked about this in the show, was to move out and get me independence back. And I thought, well, to do that, I need a day job. There's no shame in that. And then the more I started, like, sort of bringing in and getting me independence back, that's when I was like, hang on, this is now in my favor. Because when sort of like the world started to open in 2021, and I was getting gig offers, I thought, well, now I've got the money to get the train to this gig or pay for a hotel to this gig because I've worked for the last year and I've been able to sort of build up a little nest of money to me. And if I hadn't done that, say if I'd got a last minute email being like, oh, Lauren, got a gig in Manchester tomorrow, how would I have paid for the train and how would I have paid for the hotel if I hadn't have been working to support myself? And I thought it's really important as a working class comic to be very transparent about that and make it clear that it is fine to have a day job and you are not a failure, you're not doing anything wrong. Because there was times I sat on that till in Morrison's and I was like, I'll admit it, I was jealous. I'll hold my hands up. I don't think jealousy is always a negative emotion, but there was times where I sat and I thought, well, they haven't had to go back to work. They haven't had to go back to work. They haven't had to go back to work. They haven't had to go. And it was starting to really eat us up. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not good enough because I've had to go back to work and this and that and that. And then I was like, no. And if you're feeling like this, Lauren, I was like, how many other comics who've had to go back to their day job or maybe haven't even been in a position to leave their day job, how many other people must be feeling like this? And that's why I was like, everyone was like, you were so open and honest about going back to work. And I was like, yes, because I wanted people to know it's normal and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And I tried to basically take ownership of it so that if anyone tried to be like, oh, someone did again, I contributed to an article about going back to day jobs and someone was like, well, maybe if she'd worked a bit harder, she wouldn't have had. And I was like, I don't think you understand comedy and the world, to be perfectly honest, because yes, just very stressed. But I was like, it's so important to be. And I don't see myself as like working class hero, but I see myself as someone who's very much not afraid to point that out, because I still think the biggest hurdle in comedy in terms of diversity is class. I really do. And I do feel like it's the one that people still feel icky talking about, because for a lot of people it means sort of going, oh yeah, well, I have really benefited from privilege. And I remember someone once saying to us, you think middle class comics have only succeeded because they're middle class? And I'm like, no, I'm not saying that at all. I don't doubt that they would have got there eventually. What I'm saying is some people's road to success is a bit smoother and a bit has a few less hurdles along the way. And I remember someone once saying it was as well, well, that's true in all walks of life, not just comedy. And I was like, I never said it was. I went, of course it's true in all walks of life. But I'm speaking about it through the lens of comedy. And it felt like someone was trying to like imply that my point was invalid because it's true for everything. And I was like, that is still a problem. Like, of course, that is still a problem. But I do think class is such a hurdle. And even like, obviously I spoke in the show about not wanting to live in London. And I don't think there should be any shame in that. And I appreciate there's benefits to living in London, but I think in this day and age, there's no excuse for somebody to expect you to come down to London just so they can see you with a gig when they could watch a 5-minute clip of you at a gig, you know what I mean? Or maybe that person who works for a really like expensive company could come and see you at a gig and travel. And I find it baffling that I talked about this in the show and I'm still getting people going, so do you want to come down to London for a meeting? Like, we're not going to pay you and we're not going to pay your travel. We'd actually like you to spend £100 of your own money to come and have a meeting. And I'm like, did you see me show? Did you see me show that you said you really loved? Because could this not be a Zoom? Like, could this? And I appreciate, of course, I'm not saying I never want to go to London. I'll go to London when there's work and when I need to be there. But I think I've heard like stories of, I'm going to try and be very careful here so I don't give away people and programs, but I've heard many stories about comedians who've been asked to be seen for certain comedy programs. And again, they're expected to travel to London at their own expense just to be seen, and then don't get booked. And it's like, and I've had that before where I've like traveled and just to do like a tryout for a panel show or something. And you just think there must be a different way of doing this where working class comics and comics who live outside of London aren't penalised for not living there. Like, because I felt pressured to move there and that's why I went there. And a lot of people are like, oh, when you hated London, you slag off London. And I said all along, I think if I had money and I was more financially comfortable, would have loved it. Would have absolutely loved it. But because I had this constant worry about money and I wasn't earning much, so I was only able to rent what I affectionately call shitholes. my final flat I lived in London, we had mice in the walls. And that was really pushing me to a breakdown. And I said, I'm sure if I had money, I would love London. I went, but I think what was difficult for me was I didn't have any money. I wasn't living in nice places. I was just constantly under financial pressure. I'm not saying I'm like loaded now, but I'm a little bit more comfortable than I was.
Yeah.
So I think if I had to move to London for 6 months a year now, I wouldn't be thrilled. I like my flat. I like Newcastle, but I think I could do it and enjoy it more than I did. And I was like, it's not that I hated London. I hated the constant financial pressure I was under, really. And I just felt so pressured to be there. And again, that's why I kind of touch on these things in the show, because I'm like, there's no excuse really for pressuring people to move. And if you want to move, I know people who've moved and love it. Great, good for them. But I also know people who are feeling pressured to move. And I'm like, but I don't want to move. I want to own a house. And I think that's the thing. You shouldn't be put in the position where you're like, right, I have to move to London or I won't have a career, or I can buy a house and have like the personal life I want. You shouldn't have to choose between like the two. I don't think, like, if I had stayed in London, like, I don't know. I think maybe things would have changed by now with like this nomination and stuff. But I think what really relaxed me was moving back to Newcastle and the financial pressure being lifted a little bit. And I think that then had a positive impact on my mental health, which then meant I was approaching my career in a different way. And I do think, I don't know if I would be in this position if I hadn't left London, which is there is a pressure to be there. And I want to see that change, because again, I think it disproportionately affects working class acts, because they're the ones who are going to struggle to pay £7 billion rent a month. Like, you know what I mean? Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned mental health there, so there's a couple of things I want to ask you. First of all, you talked about all the changes that came to you from the pandemic, and there's no getting away from it. We're going to talk about the pandemic. Okay?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I was wondering, with the change in your home situation, your partnership, etc.
Yeah.
How far was all these changes mitigated by the fact that you're a comedian and by comedy and your sense of humour? I mean, I've heard you say about, in Morrison's, as you mentioned, writing jokes and ideas on the back of the till roll.
I've always been the kind of person who is like, jot down ideas as you have them. Yeah. And so when I was working at Morrison's, I say there was times where I thought, this is over for me. This is absolutely over. Yeah. Like, I was watching people sort of still get really nice up. And I got to do that stand up for BBC, which was really nice and I was really grateful for. But again, like, I think that came through like maybe 4 or 5 days before it filmed. And I was like, I've got a shift at work. My rote has been done. And again, this is kind of what affects comics with day jobs. And obviously, I know it's not just working class comics who've got day jobs, but definitely comics who have got day jobs and need those day jobs. I thought, oh God, well, I've got a shift at work, but I can't. So I had to like negotiate like shift swaps so I could go and do this like filming. But I was like at times just thinking, God, this is never going to come back. But I would jot down little ideas for jokes to tell on Zoom gigs to sort of keep myself motivated and keep myself feeling like a comedian, because I think this is the difference with comics who went back to work in the lockdown and those who didn't, is I think to a certain extent they will have at times stopped feeling like a comedian. But because I had another job role, I was like, well, I have stopped being a comedian because I'm making fry-ups in a cafe for minimum wage and I'm scanning through people's shopping, that kind of thing. Whereas I think if you didn't get a day job, at least you could almost still cling on to but I am a comedian because I'm not doing anything else. I am a comedian. But I think because I had gone back to like a job, I was like, it's gone. Like, I'm not a comedian anymore. I'm never going to be a comedian anymore. So it was really important for me to do that. I keep motivated. And then even after the supermarket, I went to a restaurant and same on my little waiter's pad, my check pad, I would jot down little ideas for bits and little jokes. And I just thought I need to keep in my mind that I am still a comedian, or I'll just not give up. But you know what I mean? I think it would have been very easy for us to sort of think it was all over. And I was like, you need to remind yourself. And I've sort of now slightly rephrased it on stage when I talk about that, about writing things on till receipts. I was like, I said how didn't feel like a comedian anymore. And then the penny dropped and I was like, no, I am still a comedian. I'm just a comedian who right now doesn't have a stage and doesn't have an audience. But one day I will have that stage again and I will have that audience. And that's what I keep telling myself. I was like, you are a comedian. You just don't have a stage at the minute. You just don't have a stage. But once you get back on that stage, you are a comedian. It was very, very important. I reminded myself of that.
Also on the subject of mental health, before the pandemic struck, you were doing with Aaron Gillies, you were
Oh,
doing
yeah.
the podcast Conversations
Yes.
Against Living Miserably for
Yes, I
Calm.
loved that. Absolutely loved it.
You can hear your zeal in the episodes.
Yes.
Clearly you're enthused about doing it. I want to ask about how that was, but the one thing that struck me was, of course, that started before the pandemic, and it must have really felt like it made it a change when
Oh,
suddenly
definitely.
suddenly all this new information is coming through. I mean, how was that?
Absolutely. So I loved doing it. I'd never had like an opportunity like that before. And for me, it really sparked an interest in podcasts and maybe having my own podcast one day, or maybe trying to co-host something, and then maybe stepping into like presenting or radio. And that was a real, again, just proves what happens when you get given an opportunity. It sort of switched this little switch in my head. And I was like, oh, I think I might maybe like to do something like this one day, to do more hosting, more presenting, but I love doing it. And as well, it for me was just very healthy to once a week or a couple of times a week to sit and just chat about mental health, and everything felt very like normalized, and it made me feel better about my own, it made me more open as well. And I really loved doing them. The very first one we did was with Stu Goldsmith, but that didn't get broadcast as episode 1. And I think you can tell when you listen to that one in comparison to the others. That first one, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing, and am I a co-host, or am I like sort of a second guest? I don't really know what my voice is here. Compare that to the other ones where you can tell I'm just fully like relaxed. I loved it. And then we did a few specials in the lockdown, which again I think were very beneficial and very useful. And I did this thing for one of them where I wrote myself a letter. This must have been in about the May time or the April. And I wrote myself a letter looking back a month ago, being like, what would you tell yourself a month ago? Because obviously I remember everything fell apart in the space of hours. Like I talk about this in the show. I'm like, it's not like everything crumbled over the course of several months. It was literally, the first 2 weeks of the lockdown was a bit like blissful ignorance. And then boyfriend broke up with us, which then made us realise I wasn't going to move back to London. And I was kind of, I don't want to use the term stuck at home because that sounds like I don't like my parents, but I'm sure if you've lived out of home for 8 years and then find yourself back in your childhood bedroom, losing your independence makes you feel a bit worthless. I'd lost my independence, lost my relationship, and then the day after that was the day the Fringe officially got cancelled. So I knew I no longer had the Fringe. All the gig cancellations started coming in around this time because people had sort of just cancelled the first like month of gigs. And then after that Fringe announcement, it was like a domino effect where I think people realised this isn't going anytime soon. I can't remember what my original point was. What was I talking about?
The podcast.
The podcast, yeah. So obviously I was like really like it was a lot to mentally deal with. And I think this is probably how the show ended up coming about. Once I got that sort of like, when they said we were going to do a couple of COVID specials, I was like, I think it would be really beneficial for me as someone with, I know I've not got a huge platform, but a little bit of a platform to talk about my experiences and to maybe try, don't want to brag, but I think I'm quite good with words. And I wrote this letter and I read it on the podcast. And I got so many like nice messages about it. And I was like, but again, it's like, it made us realise how important it is to use your voice and to not shy away from topics that matter to you. And I think that's, again, what was the triggering point for me to be like, you should be talking about being working class. Why are you letting other people feel like you can't talk about being working class in comedy? Because that's how we silence these discussions. If you're being told by the people with the power and the people with the privilege, oh, you can't be talking about that, oh, you're jealous, you're this, you're that, you're this, you start to go, oh, well, I don't want people to think I'm jealous, I don't want people to think I'm bitter, so I'll just not talk about it. And that's how they win. And that's how nothing changes, because you're made to feel like you can't talk about it. And I guess I was a little bit like that with mental health as well. People are like, oh, she's jumping on a bandwagon, oh, this, oh, that. And that podcast for me was the real turning point for talk about what matters to you and use your voice to like, and that's how you find your audience. And I don't know which day you came in the Fringe, but I think you'll probably agree with this. I fully believe I have found my audience. Like, I think the people 100%. Who come now kind of know what, even if they've not seen us before live, they might follow us on social media. They know what they're going to get. And I think the stand-up I do very much reflects everything else I put out there, whether it's what I talk about on podcasts, whether it's how I present myself on social media. I'm like, I'm very grateful for that podcast for helping us find my voice, definitely.
Yeah. Well, you're no stranger to podcasts. I mean, you mentioned Stuart Goldsmith, and then he interviewed you recently as well.
I fangirled so hard, right? Because don't know if he might ever hear this, so I'll tread carefully. I'm not slagging him off. I can't clarify that enough. But I did Richard Herron's podcast.
Yeah.
And getting asked to do that was so cool because I was like, oh my God, to me, there's certain podcasts that, are like almost like comedy royalty. And I was like, oh my God, I've been on like RHLSTP, like this is amazing. And then I did Adam Buxton's.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I've done Adam Buxton's. And I was like, the one that was missing for me in the holy trifecta was ComCom Pod. That was the one. And I was like, I'm in the group on Facebook as well. And every now and then I'll comment and be like, should I be commenting because I'm a comedian? And I was like, no, but I'm commenting as a fan and as a comedy fan. I'm not commenting like as a comic. And every now and then I'll see and be like, suggestions for guests. And when you're like, please someone see me. I can't put myself forward. That looks really cringe. But he got in touch after Edinburgh and I was like, thank God. I have been dying to just complete my little holy trinity of Richard Herron, Adam Buxton, Stu Goldsmith. So I was really, really buzzing, like, which I know was probably like quite cringy to admit. But I was like, I just want to be on it. And yes, I was very, very happy.
Yeah. Well, I think that one's, I'm not sure if that one's out yet, but it'll be out by the time this comes out if it's not already.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah. And of course, other comedy royalty, the Horn Section, you've done their podcast. Scroobius
oh my God, now
you've done that.
I got to go to the Taskmaster house for that one.
Oh,
and that was so cool because I was just sat in the Taskmaster house and I was like, can I be on this?
Yeah, why haven't you been on it yet? What's happening?
Oh my God. I think it's the one show every comedian unanimously wants to do. Yeah. But it is the one I would fucking love to do. But I can't decide if I'd be really good at it because I'm quite like I say, I'm quite focused and quite like driven and good at problem solving. Or if I would just cry constantly, because I do get overwhelmed quite easily. And when I get overwhelmed, it comes out like is emotion as me. I'm a very like, if I get panicky, I start crying. If I get stressed, I start to cry. Like, and it's a very weird thing because I always feel embarrassed for doing it. And I'm like, but it's almost like my body gets so overwhelmed it just pushes tears out. And I was like, I don't know how much of the footage they'd be able to use if it was just me crying while trying to land a drone on a pancake or whatever this week's challenge was. Or I'd be really aggressive. I think, like how some people have gone, like their sort of inner anger has come out. Yeah. I don't know if I'd end up just being booting off at everything. I like to think no, because I'm not a very angry person. But maybe Taskmaster would bring out a demon in us or something.
It's almost like a fascinating social experiment to find out true nature of the individual. Yeah. How do they actually react? I love
it. I absolutely love it. It's just it's nice to watch comedians like sort of out of their comfort zone and being able to use their comedic sort of talents and personas in these very unique and interesting ways. I love it. I think it's brilliant TV. Brilliant TV.
I mean, it's my favourite show by far. I didn't know I was going to be talking about Taskmaster today, but it's my favourite show by far. I absolutely love it. But it brings me nicely into my next question, which is, obviously you love Taskmaster. Do you watch other comedy and can you see it as an audience member, or do you analyse the jokes and where they're going?
This is the thing. I used to like devour like every panel show, every sort of comedy show on telly. To be honest, I don't really watch much telly full stop now. I'm one of these very much, I'm like, I watch like Netflix. Like I've become that person. So I don't really watch much like comedy other than Taskmaster. Yeah. Don't really watch much comedy on telly anymore, but I do still go and see a lot of live comedy. Yeah. I'm always amazed by comics at the Fringe who are like, oh, don't go see any shows. I'm like, what do you do with your other 23 hours a day? I go and see so much and I always pay for my tickets. I never like tap people up. I want to support my friends and my colleagues. Like I said, I don't know when this will go out, but already, so it's Thursday at the minute. I'm planning on going to see Kiri Pritchard McLean on Saturday at the Stand. Yeah. Elf Lyons is coming on Monday, so we think we're going to go see her as well. Mm-hmm. I love going and see, who did I see the other week? I'm sure I went to see someone else. Who did I go to see? Maybe I'm lying. I can't remember. But I still love live comedy, but I do think I watch it differently now. Right. I think it's impossible to turn off the comedian part of your brain. So I'll be watching it and I know where it's going to go. And the best example of that, I'll not name who because I don't want this is my anxious brain being like, it's always going to sound like I'm slagging someone off. Like, not slagging this person off. They're one of my dearest friends in comedy, and I went to watch their Fringe show. It was fantastic. It was probably my favourite show, but I feel like I kind of ruined it for myself because that element of surprise was gone. Because as a comedian, I was thinking, I can see where this is going. I can either see where this narrative is going, or I think that's going to be a callback. I can see where this punchline's going. So you kind of spoil it for yourself, but you just can't switch it off as a comedian. Colin Hoult was who I went to see. Duana Man, that's the other. I knew I'd been to see someone. But yeah, I feel like you can't switch it off in your head, and you're just always your comedian brain, or you're sitting there going, oh, I would have done that. I wouldn't have used that punchline. I would have used this. Or, oh, that's a great punchline, but I would have done this as a topper. I would have topped it with this. You could have taken that for... You kind of sit there like almost like a little director. And I was like, that's the one thing I missed from like before I did stand-up, or my first, I would say, before I started doing hour-long shows, is I miss just being able to sit and watch comedy, because I do feel like now I'm either working out where it's going, or how would I have improved this sort of thing? But not improved it, because it's not bad, but you know what I mean, how would I have added to this? Yes, I'm probably very annoying to watch comedy with, because I'm like, I know what they're going to do. I know what they're going to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a comedian, but I've seen so many shows that every now and then I sort of go, that's coming back. I know what they're going to do with that. I know where that's going. Yeah.
You're like, that's a setup. That's definitely a setup.
Yeah. I saw a comedian, I won't name the comedian, but I saw them do an interview. It was on Instagram, like an Insta Live, and people were commenting, and her husband made a comment in the comments, and I was like, that's a bit. And that's definitely going in the show. And 2 days later, I saw her show, and it came up, and that was kind of for me, because I knew where it had come from. It was kind of, and I go, I knew that was going to be in the show.
Knew that was coming. Yeah, my boyfriend says he feels like he has to tread very carefully, because he was like, I know that everything has the potential to become material, and I was like, it does, but also, especially someone like him who is a huge important part of my life, I'm like, I would never say anything you're not comfortable with. I was like, the people who have to be more worried are the vague acquaintances who I'm maybe spending an occasional bit of time with, and something might happen that I could use as comedy, but I don't value their friendship enough to ask their opinion on whether I use I was like, they're the only people who have to be concerned, because they're like, oh, well, I know her personally and know that there's a chance an interaction between us could end up being stand-up, but I also know we're not close enough that she's going to ask if I'm okay with it being used.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so the show, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Where can we see you, and where can we find out more about you and where you're going to be playing?
I will have a few tour dates left. I'll have Liverpool, Nottingham and Leicester, which are all in the first 10 days of November at various times. I've then got a run at Soho Theatre, the 7th till the 10th of December, where I will be strongly rethinking how I talk about London in the show. And I'll be trying to make it a lot clearer that my problem wasn't with London, it was with various other things that just happened to take place while I was in London. My problem wasn't necessarily London, it was I was skint, and I think I was on the receiving end of a lot of snobbery because of being Northern and working class, and I'm going to try and make that clear before I alienate potentially a lot of people. No, it'll be fine. I think most people know that that's not what I'm doing. And then I've got one random tour date, because I was meant to be at Cambridge Junction in October, but because of the train strikes I couldn't get there, and a couple of people were like, oh, could you not have gone down the day before? And I was like, do you know how expensive 2 nights in Cambridge would have been? Like, I technically I could have, but I was like, I would have then spent more money than what I was making. So I thought it'd be just wise that I reschedule it. So that's now rescheduled to January the 7th or the 10th, one of those days. But you can follow me on Twitter, which is at Lauren Pattison, Instagram at Lauren_Pattison, and my website is Lauren-Pattison. So I've never made that connection in my head, but maybe I should have just took one and stuck with it than using every bit of punctuation. I'll get a TikTok eventually and be like, Lauren #Pattison. But yes, and I'll be popping up on various gigs. I'm trying to rely less on the live circuit for an income, because it's quite stressful at the minute with travel and cost of living and all this, but I will always pop up at various gigs round and about.
Yeah. And finally, Lauren, what is to you comedy in a nutshell?
Comedy in a nutshell is about bringing people together for however long you're on stage. And it should be, for me, about making them forget for 5, 10, 60 minutes what's going on in their own lives. Like, I think comedy should be a release and an escape. And I think in terms specifically of when I write an hour, I want people to come in for an hour, sit back and just be entertained, like, so that they can leave. And the world is a bit of a shit place at the minute and a stressful place. And I just think comedy should relieve those stresses for just a little bit. Yeah. And then you sort of emerge back from whatever underground bunker you've been in and you're like, oh no, the world is still, it's still horrible. But you know what? For an hour together, we felt really good. I think that's what it's about for me.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Lovely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having us.
Take care.
Thank
See you soon.
Bye.